the happy middle, where we manage to balance this openness and these safeguards, is one that can lead to global increases in.
For coming to you, I'm what role the state can play in boosting innovation. Should it remain confined in simply setting up the appropriate framework for regulation, or instead setting up a more, let's say, holistic plan, which could also involve some critical public financing to improve innovative practices?
So I would take the view to start with that there is a much stronger tension than perhaps people are appreciating between regulation and innovation. If we look at what the source of innovation is, the source of innovation is not regulation, right? Where does innovation come from? It comes from free markets and a motivation to maximize shareholder wealth, or in the case of small startups, in order to make something, to create, and to build something where there is a need. And so when people make money in these startups, or when these startups are acquired by larger firms, this is an expression of value that's expressed through the marketplace. And of course, everybody knows this to some degree, right? But I think that this is an adversarial relationship. So we should have a very strong precautionary principle. But that very strong precautionary principle should be with regards to regulation. We need to first make sure that we're not implementing a regulatory framework that is going to... The most important innovation in the history of human beings was writing. That was the most important and critical thing that we've ever done in that day and all of its many innovations. And of course, what is the thing that led to the creation of writing? But it's bookkeeping and money-making and the desire of the Phoenicians to be able to chronicle their trade throughout the entire world. And so every time we regulate, what if we had a regulation on writing back then during when the Phoenicians were planting colonies in Carthage? And we said, oh no, we're so worried about writing. What if writing falls into the hands of the Babylonians or into the Persians? I mean, innovation is additive. So every time at the beginning of this separation, at the beginning of the separation of the lines, of the trend lines of what could be versus what is, we have this huge problem if we put our foot on the innovation earlier in the process. And of course, since time is infinite, the more we put our foot on the scale right now in terms of suppressing innovation through regulatory frameworks, the bigger problem that we could have in the future. And we see that right now in part of the discrepancy between, say, startups in the United States and startups in Europe. The discrepancy is not so bad in the creation of in the startup phase, right? There's a little bit of like around 2 to 1 in terms of startups in the initial phase, but the success rate has declined. The success rate declines in terms of these startups in Europe making it to unicorn status, where they're achieving great success or acquisition by a larger firm. We see that suppressed in Europe versus where it is in the United States. And that is because when they've reached this threshold, that's when they encounter these real regulatory burdens. I think it's also worth talking about, you had mentioned the question about what the state ought to do in terms of encouraging innovation. Well, the first thing is to step back and try to stay out of the way in the initial phase. But in terms of capital and funding, we really need to look at what financial policy is like, what tax policy is like, because these things provide space for venture capital and for capital markets to be able to fund these. So first, if we take a step back again, before we look at what the state ought to do to step in, let's first make sure that the state is not interfering in capital markets through high levels of taxation and regulatory burdens that are making it more difficult for that private capital to step in, which of course is one of the other big problems that the European Union has related to some other places in the world, where that capital is not as readily available for new startups and new innovation.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Gaetanis, allow me to come back to you. Greece has set an example over the last few years on innovation, especially on digital innovation in Europe. I wanted to dive a bit deeper in this and ask you, which are the measures and policies that the Greek government today is using to attract and increase investment in research and development, which will then apply to innovation?
Okay, since 2019, where our party took the administration of the country, our government began with a very well-designed plan to increase these activities. That's why now we have increased by 18% the expenses made for R&D in Greece, taking into account that we put down some specific plans. For example, we created a new legal framework for spin-offs at the universities and research centers. We refreshed the technological transfer offices, again at the universities and research centers, in order to help researchers and university professors to make their own firms, their own startups, and to create added values using scientific results. At the same time, we announced highly budgeted research grants, put together the private sector and the universities and research centers to work together on research projects. We introduced the Elevate Greece, which is the company under the General Secretariat of Research and Innovation, who is the hub for the Greek startup ecosystem, and Elevate Greece has the registry of the Greek startups companies. Very recently, we introduced a new legal framework for the Golden Visa. Now, Greece offers the possibility to foreign investors to put 250,000 euros, at least 250,000 euros, to one startup company of the registry of Elevate Greece, and to get a golden visa for 5 years. What else? We offer the most enormous tax initiatives, tax exceptions in Europe to the private companies to invest in R&D activities. This initiative starts from 200% to 350%, and this is another initiative for private sector to invest in R&D in order to be more competitive in the modern era. This time, the expenditure in R&D in Greece is at the half of the European level. We were close to 1.5%. Half money come from private, half money come from public sector. We would like to boost further the private sector to go to 65% approximately, which is the European average. So we have to do a lot in the next future. But since 2019, we have did a lot, and I think that at least the Greek ecosystem grows progressively.
I believe that the word revolution describes this pretty well, actually. It is well known in Europe these days. Lucine, allow me to come back. You know very well that the OECD has recommended this set of agile regulation principles to hasten innovation. The question is, how does this apply in practice, especially in such a big industry like yours?
Thank you. I look at regulation as a map, and to stay useful, it has to be updated regularly. And OECD regulatory model, this agile regulatory model, is exactly about this principle, that the regulation should evolve. It shouldn't be a wall, it should be a framework that helps the innovation to progress, which is based on science, which is based on evidence, which is promoting open dialogue and consultation. So it's exactly what and how it should be. And when it comes to our industry, talking about novel nicotine products, it's very important if regulation adjusts in line with the progress, in line with the innovation. I can give you a very good example of the Philippines. They introduced the legal framework which refers to